I am absolutely gutted to say this after finally getting around to playing it, but do not buy Alan Wake Remastered. This will not be a full-on doom and gloom roasting of the remaster though, because I will be getting into why you absolutely should buy the Alan Wake original, or at least play it again if it's been a while. It's pretty shocking to see that the guys behind this remaster D3T promised so little, with only a minimal improvement to the visuals, yet somehow managed to completely botch the job with jarring artifacting, no dialogue audio, some god-awful death animations, and even some game-breaking bugs that required a totally new save. Alan Wake Remastered is currently on sale now on the Epic Games Store for PC players, and after doing a little digging, which I probably should have done before buying and getting a refund, I'm not the only one too, seeing as the subreddit has hundreds of other players reporting bugs and across multiple platforms as well. The biggest issue for me is the death animation that you can see here, where enemies just bolt a few yards into the air and levitate for a few seconds before disappearing. Now, for those who haven't played the original, that's not some weird supernatural animation or anything. That's a bug, and one of the many bugs that are not found in the original. You had one job, D3T, just give Alan Wake a fresh lick of paint, make it look pretty, and you'll be laughing all the way to the bank. These bugs totally destroyed my experience and shattered any potential immersion, and I'm not flying high off nostalgic fumes here either, by the way. I played the game 3 or 4 times on the 360 during the first years of its release back in 2010, but I even played it on PC just over 2 years ago, so the original experience was fresh in the memory prior to me refunding the remastered version and replaying the original this week. What's even more frustrating is the visual improvements are of the bare minimum. Here's a quick side-by-side of both. I feel like there's some things that have been improved, like the draw distance, there's a lot less pop-in and more texture fidelity, but the new colour grading doesn't have that same horror story vibe. There's excessive use of bloom with the lighting and the new face models that make Alan look less like somebody keeps pissing in his cornflakes every morning and more like someone who took their bandages off too soon after laser eye surgery. Not only that, this death animation bug is a byproduct of the latest and seemingly final patch back in January 2022, which was supposed to fix other bugs and in turn introduced a new range of bugs instead, and I can confidently say that neither D3T or the original developers Remedy have any intentions of fixing these issues, hence the do not buy Alan Wake Remastered. Instead, and for a fraction of the price, you absolutely should buy the original Alan Wake, developed lovingly by Remedy Entertainment and published by Microsoft, Remedy being the guys behind the classic Max Payne series and the not so classic Quantum Break, and even more recently receiving the award of Best Art Direction for Control. It's a big AAA story-driven developer that's always trying to narratively think outside of the box. I've never actually heard of that other company though. What are they called again? Microsoft? Sounds like a pill which does the polar opposites of Viagra. The eponymous Alan Wake is a famous crime fiction author who's hit a bit of a creative wall in his career, having not written a solitary word for over 2 years. In an attempt to unclog his creative pipes, his wife Alice and his agent Barry have advised that he mooches off to Bright Falls, Washington for a little relaxing getaway. After arriving at the lakeside lodge and getting into an argument within 3 minutes of their vacation starting, been there Alan, Alice is dragged into the dark, murky lake by a mysterious and enigmatic force, and Alan's left with the task of saving his wife while untangling the tangled mysteries behind Bright Falls and why the town has been so overcome by an inexplicable darkness that possesses the locals and transfigures them into demented, murderous, axe-wielding mentalists. I love the meta-narrative within a narrative approach, as the story unravels with Alan discovering pages from a new script that he wrote chronicling the journey he is currently on, as well as the story he's about to embark on, but in the real world. The character dynamics are really imaginative and encompassing throughout the game, and to be honest, Alan was probably my least favourite character, but his monotone personality is backed up brilliantly by the quirky and lovable twat Barry.
I need my best friend Barry to carry me, but that's okay. I can just take him for granted.
I think I see what you did there.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
You want me to do my imitation of Barry Wheeler?
I found that the first half of Alan Wake makes me want to curl up on the sofa in front of a roaring fire with a good book and a hot cup of coffee, which is pretty weird because I'm illiterate and I don't drink coffee, but I spent most of my time while trying to play the game running off for a piss because I can't stop drinking bloody coffee. There's actually a Danish word for this feeling. It's called hygge. It means a quality of coziness and comfortable conviviality that engenders a feeling of contentment or well-being. You know, that Christmas market feeling looking out of the window at a snowy blizzard while you're all wrapped up nice and warm inside. Alan Wake really ignites that feeling within me, but as nice as that feeling is, it's not something you'd associate with a game that frequently straddles the margins of being labelled by some as a survival horror. The horror elements of this game are quite mild to say the least, so it would be strong to label this as a genuine horror game, more of an intense dark thriller, which doesn't make it a bad game by any stretch of the imagination, but clearly Remedy were going for the horror angle, but they employ too many visual warnings and audio cues throughout the game to warn the player of imminent enemy threats. Graphically, the game doesn't technically show its age at all, purely because it was streets ahead of the other games that were also released back in 2010. 13 years later, and with a remaster to compare it to, it's certainly got aspects that do look a little stale, which is to be expected, but still some seriously jaw-dropping views, impressive particle effects, and not too shabby lighting either. In fact, the whole package is still pleasing on the eye and still begs the question why this was remastered to such a minimal standard to begin with. I love the setting. Bright Falls is sort of place that I would love to go on holiday one day, surrounded by nature and the sunlight bursting over the mountain tops, never getting old. Although having an axe thrown at your face by a shadow man every time you turn the bloody lights off, that would get old pretty quickly. The gameplay to Alan Wake certainly felt refined 13 years ago, and for me it's still standing its ground today. It's a running and gunning style third-person action game requiring quick thinking to manually reload your weapons by hammering the reload button to slide each bullet into the chamber and assertively swapping in new batteries for your flashlight. There's a dodging mechanic that can feel a little bit janky by today's standards, but still a satisfyingly slow motion reward when timed perfectly. The combination of aiming your trusty flashlight to remove the enemy's shielding darkness, then ploughing them full of rounds is a great mechanic. The enemies you'll face are dark, possessed humans. You've got the standard type that'll lob knives and axes your way. You've got the big dudes that swing slow but hit hard, and these rapid dudes that are a pain in the arse, darting all over the place. The AI is really impressive for the time too. The enemies were always trying to flank me. It's not just humanoid enemies that you'll face either. You'll face flocks of darkness-possessed crows that will swoop down to attack inanimate objects like gates that block your path, or huge pipes of metal that hurl towards you, and even terrifying vehicles of death like a bulldozer or a bloody combine harvester that the darkness have possessed in an attempt to decimate you. On top of the gunplay, there's a few driving sections thrown into the mix which aren't that frequent, and although the journeys are mostly a means of getting from A to B so the story makes sense geographically, with the option of mowing down a few possessed enemies on the way, mechanically driving feels really floaty. The semi-open world sections were a more than welcome addition, giving me that freedom to explore a little, finding some collectibles and taking in the sights. There are a few good survival horror elements in terms of resource management as well, where ammo and batteries for your flashlight can be pretty scarce. There's a small handful of weapons throughout the game, and I felt like Remedy really fine-tuned the pistol mechanics, but the hunting rifle and the shotgun you can find throughout various episodes, these do feel a little bit flat. There's not that much oomph to them, but the ragdoll effects accompanied with the supernatural disappearing act that isn't ruined like it is in the remaster makes each pull of the trigger a satisfying one. Alan can also make good use of flares, which act as a deterrent for the dark possessed, a flare gun which is a one-hit kill, but my favourites were flashbangs, which if you were quick enough you could herd all the possessed into a corner and one flashbang would see them all pop and disintegrate into thin air. What was a little frustrating though was a lack of reward for good shooting accuracy and resource management, because you could hoard a decent amount of ammo and more often than not you'd start the next chapter without a weapon and lose all your ammo. Again, not very survival horror-esque, but there's plenty of fights with waves of enemies where I'd run out of ammo and running was my only option, which is a big fat tick in the survival horror box. As well as ammunition and resources, Alan can collect glistening blue coffee thermoses that are dotted all over the place. There's also manuscripts manuscripts on the novel Alan is writing and simultaneously living. That's a Lynchian mindfuck right there. Reading these manuscripts give the player little snippets of past sections of the story and even glimpses into what's to come, but as boring as collecting coffee thermoses became, finding TVs that showed episodes of my new favourite series, Night Springs, was an absolute joy. The voice acting in Alan Wake is mostly crap, and the lip syncing is even worse, certainly by today's standards at least. It all sounds a little phoned in. Obviously Alan is narrating the story for a player, but I felt like this was overly used and far too comforting, like I mentioned before, especially if you're going for the horror angle. As for the enemy voices though, Jesus, these guys speak as normal humans would, but with flashes of demonic grunting interjected during the same sentence.
You get 2 pills in the morning, and then you'll be nice and calm.
The sound effects are decent, whistling winds and a slight high-pitched hum which can be heard, which is another audio cue for the player to know they're about to get swarmed by enemies, which when encountered in a foggy forest becomes a little ode to Silent Hill, which I'm sure Remedy looked at as a source of inspiration when creating Alan Wake. The music selection is widely varied in terms of genres, but all suit the game's atmosphere for the appropriate moments. Remedy developed a true classic here, and while Alan Wake is certainly deserving of something rejuvenating like a remaster or even a remake, it certainly doesn't deserve a remaster that adds bugs and ruins the original's atmosphere in the process. I can't wait for Alan Wake 2 scheduled for later this year, and clearly the remaster was an attempt to remind people of the original classic in preparation for the sequel while thickening the bank balance at the same time. If you've been tempted by the remaster and love the original, my advice is just to play the original again, and if you've never played the original, then still, save your money and buy the original instead. If you enjoy having your retinas burnt out by flashlights and being groped by weird shadowy men, then this one's for you. And if you've enjoyed the video, then drop it a like and consider visiting my Patreon to help support the channel. It would be hugely appreciated. See you in the next one.